Oh, hello there, welcome back. Today I'm here to wrap up the second quarter of the year. That is April, May and June for those of you who are bad at math too. Is that even math? I don't know. I know the month of June has ended quite a while ago, but in my defense, I have no concept of time anymore, if I even had it to begin with. First, I'm gonna talk about the books that I read for specific vlogs that are already up on the channel. As always, everything is gonna be linked up above and down below. For those, I'm only gonna say the name of the book and my rating, and in case you want to know more about the book or you want to know my thoughts about the book, you can click on the link and watch the vlog. All modesty aside, those are good vlogs, okay? If I were you, I would watch them. The first of the vlogs was in the month of May, where I read books with pansexual representation, and I did that to celebrate Pansexual and Panromantic Awareness and Visibility Day. In the vlog, I not only talk about the books, but also about my experience as someone who is both pansexual and panromantic. And also I talk about pansexuality in general. So if you're interested in any of that, you know what to do. Just click the link, watch it. I think you're not going to regret it. I hope so. The first book I read for that vlog was Out on Good Behavior by Dalia Adler, and I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Wild and Crooked by Leah Thomas, and this I gave 5 out of 5 stars. And finally, Library of the Unwritten. Of course they would start construction right now. And finally, Library of the Unwritten by AJ Hackworth, which I also gave 5 out of 5 stars. Then in the month of June, which was obviously Pride Month, I made a vlog where I read 3 YA Sapphic books. And I made that one both to celebrate Pride Month and to celebrate Sapphic representation. Also to tackle some of my physical TBR, so 2 birds, 1 stone, is that the saying? And you know, there's also the fact that I am a sapphic myself. Who would have thunk? And for that vlog, I read We Set a Dog on Fire by Tilo K. Mejia, which I gave 3.5 out of 5 stars. And this one also gave me lots of Latin American feelings, and I talk about that in depth in the vlog, so, you know, one more reason for you to check it out. Then I read Summer of Salt by Katrina Leno, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. And finally, Cryer's War by Nina Varela, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. So now, with that out of the way, I'm gonna finally talk about the other 11 books that I read during those 3 months. I'm gonna go through them in the order that I read them, just because I think that's easier. So yeah, let's do that. First, we have the Ash Princess trilogy by Laura Sebastian. I'm gonna talk about the 3 books in a bundle just because I think that's gonna be easier, and I can't quite remember what happened in each of the books. I just remember the overall thing. They kind of blended together a bit in my mind. And the books in this are Ash Princess, of course, Lady Smoke, and Ember Queen. Not Amber, Ember Queen. Sometimes I have a hard time saying that right. This trilogy takes place in a world with plenty of different kingdoms and countries and whatnot, but it mostly takes place in this kingdom called Australia. Australia is a kingdom that was conquered 10 years before the start of the book, if I'm not mistaken. It was conquered and basically colonized. The people who took the country destroyed all the traditions and the culture and their beliefs. They slaughtered most of the Australians and they enslaved the ones that remained. The main character, Theodosia, used to be the princess of Australia, and her mother, the queen, was murdered right in front of her. But they didn't kill Theodosia. They kept her as a captive of sorts inside her own palace. She was stripped of her title and her own name and given another name, and she was raised among the nobility. She was kind of like a hostage, but at the same time she was under their care. The only thing that comes to my mind to kind of compare the two is Theon Greyjoy in Game of Thrones, what he was while he was living with the Starks, although that was a very different situation, but I don't know why my mind made that connection. Anyway, the book starts when she's 16 and she's been heavily assimilated already. She's been very compliant to everything the Calavaxians, which are the colonizers ask of her. She has learned to obey them out of a sense of self-preservation, really, especially because when they punish her, it's very harsh punishments. And she is essentially used as a symbol of her people and to her people, in the sense that whenever her people do something wrong, like rebel against the Calavaxians or try to take control of the mines, the Calavaxians then torture her and inflict injuries upon her, kind of as a punishment for her people. So she's a symbol. And the first book is actually called Ash Princess because the Calavaxian king makes Theodosia wear an ash crown whenever she takes part in the parties and celebrations and banquets in the court. So she's always wearing this crown of ashes that starts slowly falling apart all over her, and she gets all covered in ashes. And the king does that to humiliate her, but also to make a mockery out of her and her family, because the Australians used to believe that the royal family, the women of the royal family more specifically, were descendants of the fire god. So Theo is the princess of nothing but ashes because her country no longer exists. I'm gonna be completely honest with you, I had never heard of any of these books. The only reason I decided to read them is because they were the pick for the Finish That Series book club. The only thing I knew about the series was that it was YA fantasy. I went into it with no expectations. I didn't expect anything from it. I thought it was gonna be only like a palate cleanser of sorts. I ended up loving it a lot. I guess it does start off as a very typical YA fantasy, you know, with the whole captive princess who wants to reclaim her throne and cause a rebellion, and she has two love interests and all that. I do understand how some people would start reading it and give up on it, but it is such a nuanced trilogy in my opinion. And just Theodosia as a character brought the whole thing to another level. She is a fantastic character, which is not to say that she is a fantastic person necessarily, or that she always does the right thing, or that she always does things. That's not it, but she is a fascinating character and a extremely complex one. I saw lots of people complaining about how passive Theodosia was, but honestly her passiveness just makes sense in the context in which she's inserted in. Like, considering the life she had, considering her history and everything that she had to give upon, and how she had to assimilate and to comply over and over again for 10 fucking years, and she was raised by her captors, I think it makes complete sense that she is passive at the start of the trilogy. But not only that, she is very passive, yes, but she's also extremely self-aware. And the amount of growth that she goes through, you know, throughout the entire series is fantastic. The characters in this are amazing and the world building is great. I find that lots of times with fantasy, especially YA fantasy, I think authors don't really care about developing the culture and the different cultures within the world, and to give it details and, you know, religions and what's the difference between this country and that country and the other country and all that. But here there's a lot of emphasis on culture and religion and different belief systems, and it goes over, you know, the different countries in this world and the different kingdoms and all that, and how each of them has a specific political environment, political system, yeah, that's the word, sorry. Each of them has a specific political system and a specific religion, or more than one religion, and different cultures and all that, which I found to be fascinating. And I especially loved the culture of the Australians and learning about the culture of the Calavaxians and how the two of them clash together. That is commentary on colonization, on tokenization, performative allyship, and just lots of things. And it's, I don't know, I just loved it so much. I found it to be fantastic. And I loved how the books didn't shy away from, you know, Theodosia's internal moral conflicts, you know, which there are many of them throughout the entire series. There is a love triangle here, but I personally really liked the way it was developed. No, it wasn't polyamory, sadly.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
But I did find it understandable and realistic, and I liked the way it was done and the way it evolved throughout the series, and I liked how it ended up as well. I thought it made a lot of sense, to be honest. In the end, I gave the Ash Princess trilogy 4.5 out of 5 stars. The trilogy as a whole, but also I gave each of the 3 books 4.5 out of 5 stars. Sorry, not sorry, I don't care. I don't care, I don't care. It's just my opinion. It's just my opinion! Then I read The Roommate by Readathon. This is not the most well-known cover of the book, so I'm just gonna insert the most popular cover so you know what book I'm talking about. So yeah, The Roommate. I have very conflicting feelings and opinions on this book. This is a romance novel that follows 2 characters, Josh and what's her name? Clara. Josh and Clara. Clara comes from a very rich family, and a family that knows its fair share of scandals. So she basically did her best her entire life to not get into scandals in order to preserve the image of her family. Like, she doesn't want to stain their image any more than the people before her did. So she's always been very prim and proper and well-mannered and obedient and all that, until one day she decides to leave everything behind, including her job, and moving to the other side of the country in order to live with her best friend who she's been in love with for a million years. The 2 of them agree that she can live in the spare room in his house while she's there. The best friend has no idea that she's going there to profess her undying love, by the way. He just thinks that she's trying to start this new life, and he's like, okay, crash at my place, it's fine. But when she arrives there, the best friend says, listen, I'm gonna leave you at the house, taking care of it and just sleeping there, but I'm gonna tour the entire country with my band. Sir, this dude didn't even spend a single day with her in his own house. He didn't show her the city. He didn't make sure that she was comfortable, and he was a douche. That's, yeah. Not only that, but he has also rented his own room in the house to a guy that the 2 of them didn't even know. And he didn't tell her about that. So she is going to move into a house with a guy she doesn't know. That guy is Josh, who is a porn star, and he is just the nicest guy. He's amazing. He is very perceptive and handsome, of course, but she's very worried that living with him is going to tarnish her family's reputation in some way. At the end of the day, though, both Clara and Josh agree that women just deserve better sex. So the 2 of them start making up a plan for a business to teach people about sex. Like, teach people how to have good sex is what I meant. I really liked other things regarding the porn industry in the book, both the good and the bad. And I like that the book did criticize some aspects of the porn industry, you know, the most pernicious aspects, while still not demonizing porn itself and the stars, you know, the porn stars. Summing it all up, I liked how the book critiques certain aspects of the porn industry while not demonizing all of it. And I also really liked the idea for Josh and Clara's business, and I liked how they went about that, and it actually sounded pretty good. The smell was also pretty hot, not gonna lie. And I loved one of the female side characters, Naomi. Naomi is a very popular porn star too, and she's Josh's ex, but she's not in the story to affect the relationship at all between Clara and Josh, which I really appreciated. She was actually a very nice character, and she is the only reason I'm tempted to go on with the series, because the second book follows her, and I love her. I adore her. I want her to step on me. However, I didn't like Clara. Wasn't a fan of her at all. She really got on my nerves quite often. It wasn't even that she was a bad character per se. As far as I remember, she was a consistent and well-written character. I just personally don't like her. Well, I don't 100% dislike her, but I don't really like her a lot. I did like the hero though. I like Josh. He was nice. He was fine. And I have already established how much I love Naomi. So, and the thing is, I really liked the dynamic between the three of them. And at one point, I thought the book was kind of walking towards a polyamory road. Like, they really had the potential to be a triad, a good triad. I would love to have seen Josh, Naomi, and what's her name getting together. I think their dynamic would be fantastic. But alas, you can't always get what you want, I suppose. Sadly.
When you're not really fine.
Yeah, I gave the book 3 out of 5 stars. It was alright. Then I finally read this bad boy, Six of Crows by Lee Bardugo. Just in case you don't know what Six of Crows is about, this is the first book in a duology. This duology is the second series in the Grishaverse. It takes place a few years after the end of Ruin and Rising, which is the third book in the Grisha trilogy. But you can read this duology without reading the Grisha trilogy. I think you'll be fine. You miss a few things here and there, but the story still makes sense without having that understanding. It follows a group of 6 misfits who band together to attempt a heist in this high security place. I don't know how to talk about this without spoilers. You have Inej, a spy and an assassin. Kaz, who is the mastermind, the genius behind all of the plans, and who's always one step ahead, or 2 or 3. Nina, who is a heartrender. A heartrender is basically a person who has the power to control the body in order to kill people or hurt them. Then there's Matthias, who used to be a witch hunter, and by witch they mean Grisha, like Nina. And he was brought into the group only because he has knowledge of the place they're gonna attempt to rob. We also have Jesper, who is a sharpshooter, and Wylan, who is a cartographer of sorts. I'm not gonna go into each of them in depth just because I find that is tittering on the edge of spoilers. Is tittering even a word? So first of all, it is so nice to have read this book after reading the Grisha trilogy, and especially after having read the trilogy so recently. I read the Grisha trilogy for the first time last year, and I read Six of Crows for the first time this year. And it was very nice to read it right after reading the other trilogy, just because I could really see how much Lee Bardugo's writing evolved. Like, don't get me wrong, it wasn't bad writing before, but it grew so much from that trilogy into this duology. It's absurd. I really like the prose in this. I think Lee's writing just shines on third person, and I think this book specifically really benefited from having many different POV characters. And speaking of the characters, I adore them. They are so good, so fucking good. All of the characters are very different from each other. They are all very complex and well written, which seem to be buzzwords coming out of my mouth by this point, but I really mean it. I just don't have the vocabulary to say any other way. I'm self-taught, okay? Give me a break. But yeah, I love how different they are from each other and how that is reflected in each point of view. All the voices are so distinct from each other. I was never confused, not even once, about whose chapter I was reading. And each of the characters have their own history and baggage, and those things affect how they are today. But the best thing for me, a lover of the found family trope, is the, wait for it, found family. That trope is so well done here. I think if you love it, you have a duty to read Six of Crows. And the best thing about how it's done here is that each of the characters brings something to the table in regards to the heist, yes, but also in regards to the dynamic as a family of sorts as well. It was almost as if each of them were puzzle pieces that fit together perfectly, and I'm a sucker for that. My favorite character and the best character in Six of Crows is obviously Inej Gaffer. Don't at me. Don't fight me. I don't care. I'm just stating facts, okay? Inej is the best. But I really love all of them, honestly. Inej is just number one. I also love Kaz, and I love Matthias. And Matthias I love because I adore reading about characters that were raised in bigoted communities and with bigoted beliefs and just in bigoted environments, but that eventually after they grow up they start trying to unlearn all of that and educate themselves and try to become better people. I really love reading about that character, and I think that's probably because I relate to them. It's no secret that I was raised in very bigoted communities and environments. I love Matthias, is what I have to say. I love the type of character, the archetype that he represents, because I relate to it to a certain extent. That's what I meant. The story is awesome. The heist is tension-filled and anxiety-inducing. The ships, the relationships, the couples are so angsty. So angsty. It's perfect. I love them. And the plan for the heist, or plans, because there are more than one, are amazing. I love Cass. I love him. Anyway, I'm very excited to read the conclusion to the duology and to go on with the Grishaverse. I haven't read it yet. I really want to get to it soon. Miss Bardugo really outdid herself in this one, okay? And that is coming from someone who loved the Grisha trilogy already, so take that as you will. I gave 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo 4.5 out of 5 stars. But I'm honestly considering rounding it up to a 5, not gonna lie. Slight angle change, sorry. The month of May is Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month in the US. And Cindy from Read with Cindy, I think her channel name now is with Cindy. But anyway, she created a few years ago the Asian Readathon. This year the Readathon had 5 prompts, and for each of the prompts you could combine them and all that, but for each of the prompts you had to read a book by an author of a different ethnicity. The prompts were: read any book written by an Asian author, read any book featuring an Asian protagonist, read any book written by an Asian author in your favorite genre, read any non-fiction book written by an Asian author, and read any book written by an Asian author that's not US-centric. Any of the books that I read specifically for the Asian Readathon could fit prompt number 1, which is to read any book written by an Asian author. So consider it combined into any of the other ones, really. So for the prompt of reading any book that features an Asian protagonist, I read The Bride Test by Helen Huang. In this one, both the main characters are Vietnamese or of Vietnamese descent, and the author Helen Huang is half Vietnamese herself, and she is also autistic. One of the main characters is autistic. So the rap for both of those is on voices. The Bride Test follows Kai, who is an autistic Vietnamese American. A long time ago, Kai convinced himself that he was incapable of loving because he feels things in a different way from neurotypical people, and people kind of shamed him in a way for the way he expressed his emotions and the way he felt his emotions, and so he just became convinced that he was incapable of loving, really. He lives alone, he owns a company. I don't know if he owns a company or if he's just very high up in the company, but he's got money, is the point. And he's a cousin of Michael from the first book in the series, The Kiss Quotient. Our other main character is Esme. Esme is Vietnamese, and she lives with her mother and her grandma, and she has a daughter. She's a single mother. She's always worked very hard to provide for herself and her family. And one day Kai's mom goes to Vietnam looking for a bride for Kai. Mind you, Kai doesn't want a bride. He just doesn't want it because he thinks he can't love. And, he's got his whole life set on this routine of being alone and all that. But his mother goes there looking for a bride because she's convinced that he is going to fall in love with a woman and she can find a good woman for him. She runs interviews for it and none of it is working until she finds Esme and she talks to Esme, and Esme is up to her standards. So she brings Esme to the US with her and she tells Kai, listen, I know that you hate me matchmaking for you and I do it all the fucking time. So I'm bringing this woman here, and if you live with her for this specific amount of time, I can't remember now, I think it was a month. If you live with her for all the time and you still end up not having feelings for her or not wanting to marry her, then I will stop matchmaking for you forever. But If you don't do that, if you don't stay the entire month living with her, then I would just continue pestering you with matchmaking. And it's like, okay, fine, damn, I'll take this woman in and we'll live together for a month, whatever. But of course, the two of them start falling in love and it's their romance. And I loved it. I really loved it. It was very nice. The smut was great. I loved both main characters. Kai is just... I love him so fucking much, and reading about him and his particularities made me rethink a lot of things about myself, which wasn't something that I signed up for in the year of our Lord 2021, but here we are. And I love Esme as well. She is a hard-working woman, but she's also very kind and passionate, and she loves her daughter so fucking much, and I love all of them so much. And Kwan, Kai's brother, I adore him. So yeah, this romance was great. I really loved it. The third act, not so much, but it was fine. Like, it irritated me a little bit, but it's fine. It's okay. And I gave The Bright Test by Helen Huang 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, for the prompt of reading any book written by an Asian author in your favorite genre, I picked up Timekeeper by Tara Sim. This is a YA fantasy, which is one of my favorite genres. And Tara Sim is a Desi author. I am not sure where she's from. I think India, but I'm not sure. And by where she's from, I mean her ethnicity. Okay, so her Twitter bio only says that she's biracial and Desi, and she apparently lives in the US. So there's that. So being completely honest with you, I don't remember a whole lot about this book. I didn't really like it, and I read it a while ago. But the back says an alternate Victorian boat controlled by clock towers where a damaged clock can fracture time and a destroyed one can stop it completely. A prodigy mechanic who can repair not only clockwork but time itself, determined to rescue his father from a stopped town. A series of mysterious bombings that could jeopardize all of England. A boy who would give anything to relive his past, and one who would give anything to live at all. A romance that will shake the very foundations of time. My biggest problem with this book, and the one that made the other problems I had with it matter at all, was that I didn't like the writing. I can't tell you if the writing is like objectively I can't tell you if the writing is objectively bad or if it's just not to my taste, but I didn't like it. I just didn't click with it. Felt very shallow and amateur to me, but maybe it's just a matter of personal preference. And the fact that I didn't click with the writing was what made all of the other problems I had with the book matter at all, because usually I can overlook lots of problems, but if I don't click with the writing, then the whole thing falls apart for me. I found that everything happened way too fast, and the pacing was kind of all over the place, which again is not something that I usually care about, but I didn't really feel anything for the characters, and it wasn't that they were poorly written per se, but I didn't connect with any of them. The magic system I barely understood at all. Again, something that I usually don't give a fuck about, but in this case I did, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. And I don't have a lot to say. It does have some very interesting ideas, and it does have some very cool moments, and there were times where there would be a flash of something in a character that would make me go, oh, this is interesting, this is nice, I like this. But like overall, it just didn't work for me. And one of the ideas that I found very interesting was how the text, like the print, the typography, sometimes worked to show how the time was working in that moment. Wow, that was a bad sentence. I will insert clips of it here so that you can see, but there were some very interesting choices in regards to the typography that I found to be just fascinating. And I would have really liked if the rest of the book used that more in its favor and, you know, explained the magic system in a way that was understandable. But maybe I'm just dumb, who knows? At the end of the day, I gave this 2.5 out of 5 stars, and I'm definitely unhauling this. The only reason it got in my radar at all was that I read somewhere that it had a pansexual main character. It was one of those the word isn't used on the page, which I understand here with it being like Victorian England and all, but the sexuality in and of itself was explained, and so you could understand that it was pansexual. Although I would say lots of people would say it's bisexual or maybe demisexual, or anyway, didn't really like the book. Sorry, I really wanted to like it. I bought the physical edition, so I really thought I was gonna like it, but it just didn't work for me. Okay, so the sun is almost out, and I film with natural light, so I'm gonna have to go quick. Okay, so for the prompt of read any non-fiction book by an Asian author, I picked up The Complete Persepolis by Mahjani Satrapi. Mahjani is Persian, so from Iran, and this is her memoir, you know, her life living in Iran, as well as a lot of Iran's history, and then her life living abroad as well. Yeah, it basically follows the history of Iran through the eyes of Mahjani and her lived experiences. Okay, so the synopsis on Goodreads says, Persepolis is the story of Satrapi's unforgettable childhood and coming of age within a large and loving family in Tehran during the Islamic Revolution, of the contradictions between private life and public life in a country plagued by political upheaval, of her high school years in Vienna facing the trials of adolescence far from her family, of her homecoming, both sweet and terrible, and finally of her self-imposed exile from her beloved homeland. It is the chronicle of her girlhood and adolescence at once outrageous and familiar, a young life entwined with the history of a country, yet filled with the universal trials and joys of growing up. So yeah, that's what's about. She goes over many of her experiences, so it's hard to go in depth about that, honestly. But this was fantastic. It's a graphic novel, by the way. I'm gonna insert some clips so you can see the art. I really liked it. I thought it was beautiful and very stylish. I'm not an art critic either, can you notice? But yeah, I really liked the art, and I really loved this graphic novel, this memoir. And this version that I have and that I read is the Brazilian translation. But The Complete Persepolis is basically all 4 volumes of Persepolis in a bundle. And I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. This is fantastic. I highly recommend. I think everyone should read it. And finally, for the prompt of a book written by an Asian author that is not US-centric, I picked up Barefoot Gen, Volume 1. And this is by Keiji Nakazawa. This is the first volume in a manga series. There are 10 volumes, I believe. And it follows this young boy, Gen, and his family, and all of them are survivors of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. In this first volume, it goes over the life before the bombing and as the bombing happened. It talks about what life was like in Japan and, you know, how some people were politically persecuted. The father of the main character really criticizes the Japanese government and its choices. Japan is renowned for not being the best. I am not that well informed on the area, so I don't feel comfortable commenting on it here, but suffice it to say, Japan has a history of colonialism along with some other horrid stuff as well. Yeah, it goes over what life was like before the bombing and as the bombing happened, and the images get quite gruesome at the end of this first volume. Like, they are very explicit, very gruesome, kinda nasty. But the author himself was a survivor of the atomic bombing, so these are basically things that he saw with his own eyes. It does have a bit of a childish tone because, believe it or not, this was written for children. And you get a lot of the brothers teasing each other and making pranks and just getting on each other's nerves. And so it can feel quite childish at first, but it makes sense in the context. But I didn't mind it. I thought it was okay, it was fine. It was realistic in that sense. This edition, the Brazilian edition, has an introduction that goes a bit over the author and the history of the manga, the history of Japan in and of itself, which I really appreciated as, again, someone who doesn't really know a lot about that. So yeah, this was very interesting. This was a very good read. I just wasn't a huge fan of the art, and I wasn't a huge fan of the way that the story was told. But it was still very good, and I still highly recommend it. And I will definitely continue on with the series. I already have all the volumes with me. And I gave Barefoot Gen Volume 1 3.5 out of 5 stars. Oh, and I forgot to say, but Timekeeper, I will not continue on with the series just because I'm not interested and I didn't like it. Now, I still have 2 books to talk to you about, but I'm thinking of filming this section another day just because soon there's going to be no light out and I have a lot to say about the other 2 books. Yeah, I'll film the rest of it tomorrow. Hi, so it's been a few days and I've been trying to work up the energy to sit down and talk about the last 2 books of the second quarter of 2021. And I decided I don't want to talk about them now. I just don't. I've been trying to be kinder to myself in regards to deadlines that I impose on myself for this channel and on all, which is why my uploads have been quite sparse lately. So I just decided to leave the last 2 books to the next quarterly wrap up. So I'm gonna start the next one with those 2 books, which is a risky move, I'm aware, because I am still not sure how many books I'm gonna have to talk about in the next one, but I'm taking the risk, I guess, especially because the last 2 books are some of my favorite books that I've read this year so far. So I really want to talk about them when I am more energetic. Is that the word I'm looking for? Whenever my ADHD is not kicking my ass, basically. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about those in my next wrap up, which is gonna come relatively soon considering we are mid-September right now. So that's it for today. Let me know in the comments down below whether or not you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. And if you haven't read them, then do you want to? Do you have an interest in them? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, comment and subscribe if you feel like it. And as always, I'll see you around.